walking through the 19th century room, and we passed Van Gogh's portrait of Joseph Roulin, the postman, from 1889, and you stopped and said that this was one of your favorite Van Goghs.
It is. I find it much more interesting than Starry Night, and maybe it's because I can get in front of it and it's usually ignored.
No one is standing here and looking at it.
But also because this is a painting that, at least in its handling of the paint itself, is much flatter. The paint is much thinner. And
that's true. There's no real sense of pushing around gooey gobs of paint the way there is in Starry Night.
That's right. And so, immediately in this painting, you don't have to get through the thing that people fetishize about Van Gogh. And you can start to see, I think, what he did that was much more interesting, especially in terms of color. And in terms of making things difficult. I mean, this is in some ways a really difficult painting. It's a portrait. It's straight on. And, portraits traditionally are a three-quarter to be much more flattering. But here it's straight on. It's like a mugshot.
Yeah.
But more than that.
It's Byzantine almost. And
yes.
It's like an icon of Christ, frontal and
powerful.
Very powerful with a decorative background. It's very much like a Byzantine mosaic to me.
I think that's absolutely right. And then even more sort of unnerving for me is that there's far too much space above the man's head.
He's very low down.
He is. So that his eyes are almost perfectly centered.
It's true. And they're almost directly parallel to ours as we stand here.
That's exactly right. And it gives him a sense of rootedness and a sense of solidity and a sense of sort of low center of gravity that makes him even more powerful. It accentuates that sense of his permanence.
There's a Christ-likeness about him and his beard as well.
And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the backstory here because I think it informs all of these ideas. Roulin was one of the first people that Van Gogh befriended when he came to Arles towards the end of his life. He worked in the train station, and this painting was actually made after the postman actually left this town for a better job. I think it was in Toulouse. And so art historians are wondering whether or not this was painted from memory or perhaps it was a temporary visit, but it was somebody who had become a kind of father figure to the artist. And in fact, this was the man who looked after the artist after he had cut his ear and had that terrible fight with Gogh. And so here he is. It becomes a kind of memorial in some sense. It's somebody that the artist has lost in his life, and somebody who had been very important to him. And so that sense of permanence, I think, is valuable.
Sort of capturing the essence of someone, the idea of someone.
Exactly.
Instead of who they are in a kind of transient, momentary way.
Can I point out one of the other aspects of the painting that I love?
Sure.
Which is color.
Yeah, he's obviously thinking a lot about color and complementary colors.
Absolutely. And, in a traditional portrait, not only is this wrong in all the ways that we've already discussed, at least according to tradition, but there's no shadow. Look at the way that he's able to turn the architecture of the face without actually referring to the shift of tone of light and shadow. There's no chiaroscuro in the traditional sense.
It's modeling by color.
And by line.
And by line. The hatching actually reminds me of tempera paintings from the Renaissance when they would
turn the face.
Right, because you couldn't model with tempera paint and blend the paint the way you can with oil, but here Van Gogh is using oil but still using that hatching to model the face.
Exactly, and he's also, as you mentioned, using complementary colors. Look especially at the way in which the eyelids protrude from the concavity of the socket of the eye, and he's doing that by placing that beautiful red-orange against that green, and that tension pushes that eyelid forward in the most visible and really successful way, but he's doing it without light and shadow.
Yeah, I mean, it almost looks like it's entirely structured on thinking about complementary colors. There's blue and yellow, there's green and red. I mean, it's almost the subject of the painting.
And it's his ability, his sort of intense meditation on how color functions with structure that I find most interesting about this artist. And by the way, I think that it will be people like Matisse that really take these ideas into the 20th century and really think about the way that color functions as a structural element.
Thinking about the idea of shadow, not only in terms of modeling, but in terms of cast shadows. The